hopefully one day post COVID. My name is MacGregor and I'm chairing the event today. Today's event follows some excellent discussions we had in the past with now ministers like Andrew Griffiths and chair of the Technology and Select Committee, Greg Clark, as well as Danny Finkelstein from the Times. And all of those you can happily watch again on LinkedIn. The focus of today's discussion is how Britain can achieve its ambitions to be a global AI superpower. And it follows the publication last September of the government's National AI Strategy. And for anyone who hasn't read that document yet, I found it a fascinating read. And what actually struck me most about that strategy document is how much progress Britain has already made and how well placed we are for the future. Britain has, for example, the third highest level of private sector investment in AI, behind only China and the US. We're similarly placed in university research and, of course, in the number of AI companies, one of whom has actually joined us on our panel today. And 2/3 of large UK companies have either implemented or are planning to implement AI into their business processes. The very fact that we have a national AI strategy, again, puts us ahead of many other parts of the world. And that's why I think today's events feel so timely. And I'm delighted that we've got the Minister responsible for AI, artificial intelligence, joining us here today. Chris Philp has been an MP for Croydon South since 2015, having had a successful business career before that. He served previously in 3 departments, Treasury, Local Government and the Ministry of Justice, before becoming Under Secretary of State for DCMS in the last reshuffle in September, just around the time of the publication of the National AI Strategy, which obviously he's now taking on. We're also joined by a panel of 3 experts across different areas of AI. First, Katrina Campbell, who is a partner and CTIO at EY, and as we were discussing on the call prior to this starting, she's also the author of a book called AI by Design, available apparently at all good booksellers. Second, Tim Nebulai, who's Tim L. Sheikh, who's CEO of Nebulai, and lastly, James Perrott, who is the lead data scientist from Atos. Now, before asking Chris just to kick off with some opening remarks, I wanted just to explain the format for today. Chris will speak for around 10 minutes, and then our panel and those online will fire some hopefully modestly friendly questions at him until about half past. The Minister will then depart, and our panelists will then give some immediate reflections, and then we'll have the opportunity for those in the audience to ask their questions. If you would like to ask questions, can you please do so via the question and answer button below, and then I will raise them in the moderation during the session. So, Minister, again, thank you so much for agreeing to join us today. The floor is yours.
Wonderful, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure to be joining you this morning. First of all, I'd like to just emphasise how critically important the government see AI as to the UK's overall tech strategy and indeed our entire economic strategy. You may be aware that the Prime Minister has convened a National Science and Technology Council, which he is personally chairing, to drive forward progress across the whole science and technology space. And the early priorities that have been identified by that council are artificial intelligence, quantum computing, semiconductors, and advanced telecommunications. So AI is one of those 4 critical areas where the government is really putting its full weight. And as Mark says, we're very fortunate, or perhaps not fortunate by design. We have by far Europe's leading ecosystem for technology in general and AI in particular. Only China and the US are ahead of us. The tech sector this year is having a phenomenal year, as you probably know. We've now got about 110 UK unicorns, which is more than France, Germany and Israel combined. And unicorns are being born, if unicorns can be given birth to, at the rate of around about 1 a week. And private fundraising into the tech sector in the first half of this year was 13.5 billion sterling, by far the highest of any European country, and around about twice the level of the next country, which was Germany. So we're having a phenomenal year this year, and AI is a critical part of that. And that is reflected in some of the phenomenal companies developing AI here in the UK. For example, people will have been following, I'm sure, Accenture, which floated on the London Stock Exchange 2 or 3 months ago. They use AI to accelerate pharmaceutical drug development. Everybody probably also is familiar with Oxford Exscientia floated on NASDAQ. Oxford Nanopore floated on London Stock Exchange. They use AI to support genome sequencing, dark trace using AI for cybersecurity purposes, and DeepMind doing all kinds of things, including using AI to map folding proteins. So a huge number of companies doing innovative work, and there are many more as well. For example, Logically, a startup in Yorkshire, creating an AI-powered news platform, or Catalyse in Northern Ireland that develops AI tools to help dairy farmers decrease carbon emissions of milk, milk production. So we have just an enormously innovative and dynamic and successful AI community here in the UK, which we need to foster, nurture, build, and generally turbocharge. And from the Prime Minister and the Chancellor downwards, the government is fully behind that. We've done a huge amount already. For example, skills is a critical area where a lot has already been done. Going back to the AI sector deal a few years ago, a £1 billion partnership between government, industry, and academia, amongst other things, supporting universities building on their strengths. And that included 1,000 artificial intelligence related PhDs in a whole range of universities: London, Cardiff, and Swansea for pure AI and computing, Leeds for early cancer diagnosis, Edinburgh and Sheffield in speech and natural language processing, to name but a few. So I think 1,000 artificial intelligence PhDs will make a real difference to the knowledge and the raw research coming out of our universities. We've also got Turing AI fellowships to make sure we can attract the best talent here into the UK. There are currently 25 AI fellows carrying out cutting edge AI research using about £46 million of government funding. And then more recently, we've been running AI masters conversion courses. There are 2,500 of those running, and there are a large number of scholarships supporting those masters conversion courses. And in fact, the Chancellor, in his speech to the Conservative Party conference a few weeks ago, doubled those scholarships from 1,000 up to 2,000. So huge investment in artificial intelligence skills going on. People will know we've had the Office for Artificial Intelligence up and running since 2017. It was launched via a review in 2017. We've got the Independent Artificial Intelligence Council, who I'm meeting later on this morning, and the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. So a number of critical bodies working with government to drive forward progress in this area. Now, Mark mentioned earlier that we launched the Artificial Intelligence Strategy a few weeks ago. It was in late September, shortly after I was appointed, so I can't completely claim credit for it. I suppose one might say that it almost wrote itself. And that encapsulates a really important plan and vision for the future to make sure that we power on ahead with artificial intelligence. There's a number of areas of activity which the strategy points towards. One of those is an increased and renewed commitment to research and development in the AI arena. We saw in the spending review a few weeks ago, total commitment to R&D expenditure in the UK increasing from £15 billion a year today up to £22 billion a year over the next few years. That's an almost 50% increase. And obviously a fair chunk of that will be heading in the direction of AI, which is extremely important. We're also looking to build out a proper kind of governance framework for AI. Obviously, it's an emerging technology. It's very important that the public and consumers and users feel comfortable with AI, that it's safe, that it's being used in a responsible way. So we're going to be bringing forward a white paper next year on that. But as we think about the regulatory framework, we intend in the UK to be extremely light touch. We intend to be very proportionate. very outcomes based. We'd like ideally to we broadly intend to use existing regulators in different sectors rather than new ones. We don't want to stifle innovation or be too heavy-handed. Now, there are some other jurisdictions who tend to take a much heavier-handed approach to regulation. We don't want to repeat that mistake. We want to enable innovation to flourish. A good example, or perhaps a bad example of that, is the way that the European Union regulated GM, genetically modified technologies, a number of years ago. And as a consequence of that, European countries, including the UK, because at the time we were members of the European Union, we really didn't get ahead of the curve on GM innovation, and that all happened in North America, particularly the United States. So we definitely do not want to repeat, in my view, the mistakes that were made in connection with that. So I would definitely commend the AI strategy to you. We're going to be working on turning the strategy into actions, but some of those have been taken already in the areas that I've mentioned. Just, Mark, finally, more broadly, there are a number of tech actions we're taking which are designed to support the tech ecosystem more broadly, but AI clearly is an important part of that. One of those is making sure that the most talented people from around the world can come here. And there are some new visa routes that we're going to be opening up in about March or April of this coming year. One is the scale-up visa, where if a fast-growing company, and by the way, the definition of fast-growing is laughably low. It's 20% compounded annual growth in either headcount or revenue for 3 years. So most tech businesses clear that comfortably. If they want to bring someone into the country and they're being paid more than, I think, £33,000 a year, there will be a fast-track expedited visa process to make sure growth companies can get the global talent they need. There is also a visa route where if people went to a top university globally, then whether or not they've got a job offer, they can rapidly come into the UK. So we're, besides obviously developing and nurturing domestic talent, which is very important, we're also making sure the brightest and the best from around the world can come here quickly and easily, which is extremely important. On the funding side, clearly it's really important we have the right funding in place as well. Generally speaking, our VC community and our seed community is pretty active, particularly seed round, Series A, Series B. We think there is an opportunity to do more to encourage UK financial institutions, particularly pension funds, to invest more at scale in UK VCs to do larger investment rounds, kind of Series C plus, 50, 100 million pound plus rounds. Those are currently typically getting done by US VCs, often West Coast. Now you might say, well, that doesn't matter, the capital's coming here. Our view is that it does matter for 3 reasons. Firstly, it's a missed return opportunity for UK pension funds. The US pension funds who are funding US VC are capturing the increased returns being generated by growth tech investments, which generate much higher returns than the public stock markets. Secondly, we're missing out on the ecosystem that sits around those larger VCs. And thirdly, if a UK growth company has West Coast VC capital in its Series C round or its pre-IPO round, it's more likely to end up on NASDAQ rather than the London Stock Exchange. So we do think it matters for those reasons. And we'll be seeking to encourage the UK pension sector to think about its allocations quite carefully, particularly given that they're missing out on a return opportunity. And we're consulting on some changes at the moment in relation to the pension fee cap that will make it easier for pension funds to invest in VC firms. As far as the stock market is concerned, I mentioned earlier that Oxford Nanopore listed on the London Stock Exchange in October. It's been a hugely successful float. The stock price, I think, is up about 50%. I was talking to Gordon Sanghera, who runs that business, and he said that the investment bankers advising him tried to push him towards NASDAQ, citing a whole number of reasons to do with analyst coverage, liquidity, valuation, and so on, and access to North American investors. But Gordon very patriotically disregarded their suggestions and listed on the LSE and found that those warnings or that prognosis turned out not to be accurate. And in fact, he got the valuation he wanted. About half the capital he raised did actually come from North American institutions, so he was perfectly able to access North American capital through his London listing, and the depth of analyst coverage was adequate. So he got the valuation, and in fact the share price has gone up very considerably since then. So we are very keen to encourage AI companies in particular, tech companies more generally, to list on the London Stock Exchange. One of the issues we've had is we haven't had SPACs on the LSE until very recently. And in fact, you'll have noticed that Benevolent AI listed on used an Amsterdam-based SPAC just, I think, earlier this week or last week, but we now have changed our rules on SPACs. The first one has now got off the ground, Hambro Perks. So that route will be open to tech companies on the London Stock Exchange as well. And last week, the FCA also changed the listing rules to allow a dual share class and to allow the free float to be as low as 10%, both of which are things tech firms have been asking for. So hopefully this gives a very clear sense that the UK is leading Europe in tech and AI, which is fantastic, but we are not resting on our laurels. We are determined to stretch that lead even further, perhaps even to catch up America and China. And at every point of the value chain, from skills to raw research to the financial ecosystem, the government is pulling every lever at its disposal, from the Prime Minister down, to make sure that we are successful in this sphere as a nation, because it is truly the future of our economy, and we are determined that the United Kingdom will win. Look, finally, I know many people here work in the sector, so just quickly to say thank you for the fantastic work you're doing. It's thanks to the innovation and the investments by people like those represented here today that we are so successful. So thank you very much indeed for everything you've done. We are here to help, support, encourage. If there are roadblocks on your runway, we're here to clear them. Our door is open 24/7, 365 days a year. So if you need anything, please do make contact with us here in DCMS. We would love to hear from you, and look forward to working with you to extend the UK's success in this area even further. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was incredibly positive. Sometimes when you sort of see the reporters of politics, you forget that government is actually incredibly important in driving forward things like artificial intelligence. I just have one, before I bring in the rest of the panel, just have one quick question. If you thought there was one, you covered a whole range of different things there, from skills to universities and the like. Is there one particular area, that you think is sort of the single biggest challenge that faces the UK to sort of carry on achieving its goals?
That's a very good question. I mean, I would certainly, if I think about the challenges that I'm most keen to overcome, I suppose, and I've touched on a number of them. I think getting clearly, tech development, tech growth, and AI in particular is very capital intensive, and the government can contribute to that, and we are funding primary research via that increased 22 billion a year UK RI funding. But it is essential that we get non-government capital in, and there is a gap, a significant gap, because our financial institutions, particularly pension funds, are not investing in pre-IPO tech via VC in a way that their American cousins are. 65% of the capital going into American VCs comes from American pension funds like CalSTRS and Texas Teachers and so on. In the UK, the figure is only 12%. We're getting beaten by the Europeans, who are 18%. There is a massive missed opportunity because our pension funds are not, and we have obviously trillions of pounds. So even a 5% allocation of those pension fund assets under management into tech and AI would have a transformative effect. So I think this, in fact, the thing that's top of my sort of worry list and to-do list is that point. I mean, there are lots of other things as well, but that could be a real game changer. And I've been discussing it with John Glenn, the City Minister, with Guy Upham and the Pensions Minister. We discussed it. There was a roundtable at number 10 on this topic that the PM and Chancellor chaired a couple of weeks ago. I was at a roundtable at number 10 early this week with Alex Hickman, the business advisor, and fintech leaders. And again, this topic came up a lot. So I think that is the single biggest thing that I would point to. So if anyone here is advising pension funds or talking to them, they are missing out on a massive return opportunity for their pensioners and for their funds. We're consulting on fixing this charge cap issue. The consultation was published a week ago. There is no reason not to do this at all. And your US cousins are doing it with huge success.
Thank you so much. Let me bring in Katrina Campbell, because I know we're quite tight on time to ask the first question for the panel.
I can run over slightly, Mark. It's okay.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Minister. That was just terrific to hear. So as you know, EY were honoured to be able to provide your primary research for the National AI Strategy. And the primary research that we provided was effectively the quantitative research into British business and what they're required from an AI strategy. Now, in doing this work, when we reached out to businesses from small, medium enterprises in the UK, all the way up to gigantic corporations, they told us a number of things. So moving on from your conversation around building better tech companies, I want to move to building better British businesses from small to large, enabling AI to create long-term value. So my question to you is, they cited 4 things that they said they needed, that were challenges. They cited lack of trust in the data that they have. They cited poor access to relevant skills, challenges with legacy infrastructure, and difficulty in identifying the ROI, or the value of their data. So I wanted to just, if I may for a moment, just talk to you about the skills piece, okay? How do those incredible skills in those organizations flow through to British business? And what can we do more to support British business implement and improve using AI?
That's a big question, Katrina. Look, I think your point about AI adoption is critical, because I mean, AI applications in and of themselves are fine, but until businesses really adopt them, you know, we're not going to feel the full benefits. And I think actually one of the ways we can fix the UK's long-term productivity problem is by diffusing technology, and in particular AI, across the economy. So adoption is critical. Government can do a bit of that. So we know that things like NHSX are quite forward-thinking in terms of AI adoption, but there is more we can do there. As Gordon Sangera at Oxford Nanopore was saying to me last week, there are other government departments that can adopt AI as well, like one of my old departments, the Home Office, for example, could. And we can also, I think, be a little more agile via the Cabinet Office in terms of procuring from smaller tech firms rather than only from very large ones. In terms of the economy more widely, we're trying to encourage AI adoption. So one of the changes in the budget was we extended the scope of R&D tax credits to include cloud computing and data, both critical for AI. That will hopefully help encourage adoption as well. There's also the Help to Grow sort of mentoring and coaching programs, which I hope will move people towards technology adoption. So you're absolutely right. We need to try and encourage that and push that using every means at our disposal. On the skills point, so a number of companies are offering great skills programs. So for example, Google's Digital Garage is a great example of that. And again, we're keen to encourage companies to offer digital skills training, making the apprenticeship levy a little more flexible. I've been discussing that with the skills minister, perhaps trying to fit together some sort of national framework. So any company's kind of skills program, you can fit it into some kind of architecture so people kind of know where it fits in. So you sort of know what what level it's at and what sort of skills it's conferring. Not trying to impose some kind of national like national curriculum for skills, but to just have some sort of architecture it can fit into. There might be, I mean, obviously I can't speak for the Treasury, but I am sort of lobbying for further tax changes that might make skills training more attractive from a tax point of view. But obviously that's Treasury's gift rather than mine, but it's certainly something which I'm lobbying on. So that was a really sort of brief answer to what was a very deep question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. James Perrott from Atos.
Thank you. So I do have a question, and it's really about the regulation of AI and machine learning and how we see the governance working in the future. And this is whether we see the role of governance being primarily sat with the AI researchers, AI engineers, and data scientists in this. And it's essentially, from a professional standpoint, self-regulating like law and medicine tends to be, or whether we see a kind of, as part of your discussed AI ecosystem, whether there's a greater degree of external oversight, external to the profession, and really where the emphasis is going to lie, not just in 1 or 2 years' time, but possibly that kind of slightly longer term, 5-10 years' time.
Yeah, thanks, James. Well, look, I mean, that question is something which the white paper next year will seek to answer. But my sort of instinct is that regulatory interest is likely to be mostly at the application level, i.e., when you take, by which I mean this is when you actually use AI in a particular context. And it's likely, I would imagine, that most regulatory interest will be sector specific, depending on the use the use class or the use type. So you might have the same AI technology, but you might have a different regulatory view depending on whether you're using it in a law enforcement context versus a financial services context versus some other context. So I think it'll be very context specific. So one approach might be simply to say to existing regulators, like Ofcom, who regulate telecoms and media, for example, or other gambling commission who regulate gambling, or whoever or the FCA who regulate financial services, to get them to think about what their approach to AI is going to be in their specific domains, rather than trying to. We don't really want to be intruding into people's laboratories, I don't think, because while the thing is in the laboratory, it's sort of not hurting anyone, right? It's just a research project. So that might be one approach. There might be some kind of cross-cutting issues, and again, I'm just thinking out loud here. We're still thinking about this issue. That might be sort of genuinely cross-cutting. Like there is this question about whether some AI systems end up developing a version of unconscious bias, right, based on the data sets that get fed into them. So based on particular characteristics. So that might merit sort of more cross-cutting attention, but we want to be as unintrusive as possible, because otherwise it will just get in the way of innovation. And as I say, we saw that with the way GM got squashed in Europe, however long ago, 10 or 20 years ago.
And as we're approaching 9:30, but Tim, do you have a quick question for the Minister? I think you're on mute. Tim, you have to unmute yourself.
Right. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I was saying that my question is actually related to the point that James just raised, because with my company, we're looking at the ecosystem around AI. So we're not looking specifically on individual applications of AI, but rather how could these applications go across different sectors? Because we're looking at it from the digital transformation perspective. And digital transformation is basically different sectors and different ecosystems effectively converging towards one another over the years. So that kind of raises a lot of challenges in terms of regulation. So if you've got certain regulators in certain sectors, well, what happens when these two sectors start to converge? So that becomes a challenge. And of course, also in terms of the skills, if somebody involved in AI, say in healthcare, would that person be able to, say, transition from healthcare, say, to finance? And we're seeing more and more of that sort of convergence occurring, which actually brings me to my question, actually two questions, if that's okay. Basically, if you had a thought about this potential future and what the challenges and how the government could deal with these challenges. And the second question is related to that. And we're seeing this trend predominantly in Asia, where there's a rise of blockchain technology that's being involved as part of the AI ecosystem. And I did not see any mention of blockchain in this report. So I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts on that. Thank you.
And on the question of kind of convergence, cross-sector convergence, and AI technologies being applied laterally across different sectors, I mean, it may well be that the same AI technology gets looked at a little differently depending on the sector it's being deployed in, because the use class may determine the regulatory view, because the risk, right, will vary depending on the potential harm, will vary depending on the context in which it's being deployed. But there is a need for kind of coordination, you're right, for edge cases, and to ensure that there's kind of decent common expertise levels across different regulators. And there may be some cross-cutting issues, like foundational cross-cutting issues anyway. So there, in terms of regulatory architecture, I mean, again, the policy is being developed, so I can't kind of announce what any policy may be, but instinctively, we don't want to create some like new AI regulator, because that just feels like it's going to be intrusive and it just creates extra bureaucracy. So hence the desire to rely on existing regulators. However, there are cross-cutting issues and there are coordination issues. So the way that that's been handled so far for digital issues in general is there's this entity called the DRCF that's been established, the Digital Regulation Coordination Forum, which is like an informal, it's non-statutory, it's not set up in law. It's basically an informal, well, it's formal, but it's not set up in law. It's been established by the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority, the Information Commissioner's Office, Ofcom, and the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority. Those four regulators have come together and created this DRCF construct. I think Melanie Dawes, who's the chief executive of Ofcom, chairs it, and they've hired a CEO recently who's, I think, formerly from Google or Amazon, I forget which. And that is designed to provide a coordinating function and to look at kind of cross-cutting digital issues, deal with edge cases and so on. So it may be that kind of concept could just be built upon and developed, right? Because it basically draws on, it kind of sits alongside and draws from existing regulators in a non-statutory way. But that is like thinking in progress. So I haven't got a sort of settled answer. You asked about the interaction of blockchain and AI, and that's an issue that's been drawn to my attention relatively recently. It's not an area that we've done a great deal of thinking about, to be perfectly candid. It's one we need to think about, and I'd be interested in your views about where the risks and opportunities are, if you have just a second to talk about it.
The thing is with blockchain, yeah, it is like with AI, there's a bit of misunderstanding of what it is and what it is not. And I think there is an opportunity for blockchain, especially when it comes to security. And you alluded earlier about data ethics and even general digital ethics programs. And blockchain can actually play a good role here because effectively it hides your identity. So that could be a good thing and a bad thing. I personally think there is an opportunity to add blockchain into this convergence between sectors, which actually can solve the problem of the regulation. I completely agree with you that we should not have any regulation, sort of this AI regulation where somehow, I mean, I can't remember, was it a European regulation that was considering monitoring algorithms, which I'm like, how do you even do that? It won't work. So I think whilst we do need to have strong regulations in general for AI, because we need to have responsible AI, that's absolutely true. But it's not as simple as just simply saying, okay, you could do this, you cannot do that. AI is unpredictable, and I think blockchain could actually set a very nice foundation where we can tell where the algorithms could go, in which direction we can control the data, etc. But that's the theory. I mean, it's still a fairly new concept of sort of integrating blockchain into AI. I can't give you any successful examples because there aren't any, in my opinion. But certainly, I think as a framework, blockchain could play a very critical role, especially again looking from the point of view of digital transformation and IoT. Blockchain can be that common sort of data connector between all these different sectors and different technologies as well.
Great. Thank you, Tim. It's clearly an area we need to look at.
And thank you so much. And at the beginning of the call, Chris's office asked us to make clear that we couldn't take him beyond 9:30, and I see that we've gone to 9:35. So thank you so much, Minister, for the contribution today. It's fantastic to have someone who's such clearly a passionate advocate for AI, and it's clearly going to be incredibly important for the future of the country, and to see someone so clearly on top of their brief, considering you were only there in September. So thank you so much for your contribution today. Wish you the best for the rest of your day. Interesting discussions in Parliament, no doubt, and we'll move on to our panel. But thank you again for your contribution.
Wonderful, my pleasure. Good to see you, Mark, and nice to meet you as well, James, Tim, and Catriona. Hopefully, see you again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Very good. So thank you for the questions from the panel. As I said at the beginning, the format is that we'd quite like now just for the three panelists just to give some brief reflections, and then we'll open up to the floor. So Catriona, could you perhaps kick off?
Yeah, so just, I mean, in summary, wow, he was totally on top of his brief. And what a phenomenal place to be, where we have convened so many organizations, so many different departments to create one unified national AI strategy. So if the audience hasn't downloaded a copy, as Mark said at the start of this, I certainly would encourage you to do so. So let me start by saying, Mark, that obviously, EY is a former accountancy firm and now huge organization, 400,000 staff worldwide, 180 countries around the world, and 40,000 of those are in the UK. And so we are looking at this as a significant challenge for our clients, British business and the third sector, and indeed government. So what we've been doing is, in order to really help and encourage the adoption of AI in the organizations that we work with, we've been upskilling ourselves. And to that skills point, he was talking about the PhDs, he was talking about national apprenticeship schemes, he was talking about the fast growth organizations and the fast visas to really bring in the skills. Well, we've been home-growing talent as well as finding that talent in the market. And I think it's really important that we realize that we need to incentivize organizations to learn how to adopt AI and how to your point, Tim, use it responsibly. And so what we have been doing is we've been helping our staff understand the very nature of AI and to upskill themselves in the basics. So we have a digital badges program across the organization, and it allows our staff to do that remote learning. So what I wanted to just mention very briefly was obviously delighted that there is such incredible strategy for talent. However, I think we need to be encouraging British business to adopt and understand machine learning and AI in order to drive the adoption, not just in the tech companies, but also throughout British business. So that's the point I wanted to make. Delighted by the progress, but I think we have a long way to go. You're on mute.
Still don't get it right after all this time. James, bringing you in, and you're not on mute.
Thank you. So I work for Atos, a technology company, and we do have a kind of lot of contact with AI, but also as a consultant, and in our consultancy arm, we have a huge amount of contact with other businesses as well. Businesses that kind of face a lot of the challenges that this AI strategy is designed to address. So I suppose, first of all, just to address the AI strategy, I think that there's a lot of really, really good content there. One of the things that I was particularly impressed by with the strategy is the focus on AI as part of a broader ecosystem. And it's not just the technology at the top, but it's I suppose everything that rests on. That you need to have the infrastructure there, you need to have the data, you need to have the skills, and I think it is very important that we address sort of every part of that chain. I think that because I work in the sector, I have sort of a lot of contact with some of these the companies that are very tech savvy, sort of organizations like pharmaceutical companies that do a lot of work with sort of the really advanced AI. It can be quite easy, I think, for this to cause us to overlook that a huge amount of the benefits that we're going to get from AI are going to come from things like your SMEs, your small and medium-sized enterprises, maybe your companies that we don't tend to think of as being sort of high-tech companies. But they still have a lot of data. They still get a lot of benefit from kind of processing this data in a powerful but responsible manner. And I think that that's one of the areas that I'd be really keen for us to explore as we go forwards, how to, I suppose, build from the ground up. And I see that there's really an open question about how we get more people into AI. And I think that how we get more people in from all skills levels, from different careers, different backgrounds, is also people moving sideways into it. And that's going to happen as people get exposure to it. And the more that AI permeates the whole economy, the greater the opportunity we have to move people in from these broader backgrounds and really take advantage of all of the skills that we've got in the UK there.
Okay, just before we bring in Tim, if you want to submit a question, please do so on the Q&A at the bottom. There actually has already been some questions coming in, one of which I saw the Minister answer while he was speaking. So that's an instant response. Tim.
Yeah, no, I think I'll pretty much reiterate what Katrina and James said, that the report is quite comprehensive. I'm not usually a big fan of government reports, not just the UK government, any government report, because it's tend to be quite political and they say, we want to be the leader in innovation, but then define innovation. So for me, I actually was quite happy that this report, as I said to the Minister, that focuses a lot on ecosystem. Because if like, just to give you a bit of my background, is that because people think that I'm an AI person, actually I'm not. My background is in medical science. so the way I look at AI is very different from, say, an engineer or mathematician. And I think that's the point. AI is not exclusively for mathematicians or engineers. And therefore, as a business, what I advise our customers with Nebulae is that, in fact, any company can adopt AI. But it has to be done in a completely different way that people think. Because some people have been thinking, and James sort of alluded to that point, that AI is always sort of that central solution to everything. but actually it's not. In fact, even though we're an AI company, what I tell our customers that AI is the last thing you need to think about, because it's a journey. What you need to think about is how do you build this ecosystem that will generate the AI output for your company. So it's not a top-down approach, but rather bottom-up. So it always starts with things like data strategy. It starts with your skill strategy within your organization. And when I say skill strategy, I don't mean that you have to start hiring PhD graduates. You actually can train your own employees. As I said, in theory, I should not be in AI, but I am, because I learned how to deal with AI. As I said, as an ecosystem, it's not just about the coding. It's not just about data strategy. There's so many different elements involved that simply to think that AI is this sort of this off-the-shelf thing that you just can plug it into your system and boom, you have intelligence. Unfortunately, that's not how AI works. And in fact, we need to be very open about the level of failures that we've seen in AI projects over the years. And I've been a tech entrepreneur for 20 years. So I've pretty much seen it in biotech and outside biotech. But certainly, MIT released a report a year ago where they highlighted that only 10% of all of the major AI projects around the world achieved any reasonable success. So that's 90% failure rate. And this is not because AI is bad or because the algorithms are bad, but rather it's experimental. Elon Musk sort of went publicly recently, said that AI is still kind of in beta. Well, actually, AI has been in beta for the past 50 years, and it will continue to be in beta for the next 50 years. It's a really complicated endeavor, because it's really about, if you think about it, and I speak here now as a medical scientist, that we look at AI as a way of depiction of our understanding of intelligence. But I can tell you that we have no understanding of what intelligence actually means. There's so many elements involved. We're talking about consciousness. We're talking about emotions, intuition. How do you replicate that through algorithms? We can't, not yet anyway. One day we will, but right now we're still at the very early stages of this AI success story that we're always, that we've been thinking about for a very long time. But that does not mean that AI cannot be useful. AI absolutely can transform your business, but in fact, it's not the AI that transforms your business, but the strategy around the ecosystem around your AI strategy can absolutely transform your business. And this is how we tend to work with our customers, that we take it step by step, where every step has to make a big difference to your company, even if at the end of the day, you don't have AI. So, and that's why I really like this report. I think I say it's the first report that kind of emphasized this point, that it's all about the ecosystem. But of course, for me as an entrepreneur, the proof is in the pudding. I want to see more investments into the ecosystem. I want to see more investments into not just PhD students or people involved in AI directly, but actually, how do we bring sort of the normal people into AI? I think that's absolutely critical. If we want the digital transformation strategy to be successful, well, we all have to be part of it, not just developers.
Yeah, fascinating. Come back to the question I asked the minister. Is there anything missing in the AI strategy? Are there things that you think the government hasn't sort of understood that actually could drive this innovation, or is it covers it all? But as you just said, Tim, you need to see the detail. Are there things that you think, well, actually this is going to be the biggest challenge, and they haven't really properly addressed that? Katrina, do you want to jump in on that?
I have a view. I think it's about getting the population of the United Kingdom to really trust organizations with their use of their data. Okay, so I think that we have a very big job to do, and we could get this incredibly wrong if we're not careful. We have a very big job to do to provide the comfort to consumers that we're using their data effectively. So garbage in, garbage out is the old adage, but if I look at the bias that Amazon faced when it got part of their algorithm data set terribly wrong, it causes concern for me. I think guidance to business, British business, needs to be created and drafted where they're saying, you already have internal controls frameworks. You already control your risks in your organization. You have to prove certain things, if you're regulated in the United Kingdom. I honestly think that we need to include the use of consumer data as well, so that we can prove the decision making, the flow of the data, get the data foundations correct, in order for us to retain the trust that we have with our consumers. So I think a bit more about the internal controls frameworks, to get a bit nerdy on you, would be really important for the next stage of AI adoption in British business.
And do you think the sort of regulatory regime we have for that is sufficient at the moment then?
I really don't, Mark. And I suppose if we were to create guidance, really easy to apply guidance, then I think that, yeah, that could really support British business understand more about the trust that needs to be created. But I do think that needs to happen, and happen quickly. Okay,
James, you have a take on that?
I think that I would agree with most of that. I think just to chime in on the trust issue, I think that this is related to kind of obviously accountability. And I think that when we're kind of talking about accountability and trust, we need to, I suppose, move almost as a society to not just communicating better from the perspective of, I suppose, I think of it as people like myself who kind of have very much one foot on the technical side and communicating that out. But we also need to teach people in places like schools to be asking the right questions, to understand what bias means, to be able to just have that data fluency, that fluency in statistics, to really hold us to account. That we don't necessarily want to be trusted without cause because it is removed from people's lives, that it's abstract, it's inaccessible. We want to be trusted because we are genuinely doing a good job, because we're genuinely being held accountable. And that means that the people who we have to be accountable to, which is everyone, then has to actually have the facility to not necessarily at the deepest, most technical level, but certainly at least to be asking the right questions and to be able to sort of really get the most of the answers that are going to be coming back there. So building trust and really pushing forwards with AI, I think has to build on this kind of longer term kind of social acceptance of AI built on a common understanding.
Okay, thank you. Well, just moving on to one of the questions that's come in from Daniel Wilson from BT Group. He asks, what more can the UK and firms do to make sure we don't just train the expert data scientists, engineers we need to build AIs, but a workforce with sufficient skills to understand how to buy AI and deploy AI ethically. He then goes on to say, there's sufficient qualifications, boot camps, public campaigns in place. Maybe, do you want to come on that, Tim? Is that something you might want to cover?
Yeah, actually, and it's quite related to what Katrina James just said as well. Because one of the things, and I'm not here to sell my company, but I think it's important you understand my point of view. One of the areas, in fact, our USP is something called psychographic analysis. So basically, we're looking at human behaviors, and in fact, how do we then use effectively AI and data science to influence behavioral change? And indeed, everything that in fact, what James and Katrina were saying in terms of how do we build trust in AI, how do we build trust in this sort of new world of digital transformation? And that has to come from behavioral change, because effectively, what we've seen during the pandemic is that we've been forced to change our behaviors and our way of life. And what we're seeing, part of the research that we do, we just look at general behaviors across different markets. And we are actually seeing that there's a big drop in trust towards tech sectors right now. Effectively, there's a general thought process that, we're trying to exploit people. And which is obviously, that creates a challenge of its own right. But similarly, one of the challenges, for example, that we're seeing when we're talking to customers is how do we actually influence behavioral change within the organization itself? And we're talking about from the management all the way down. So to simply go to the company and say, yeah, you should adopt AI because it's good for you. Well, most likely you will say, you will get resistance. You'll be like, well, no, I don't want to replace my employees. So that you get that sort of reaction. But of course, going back to the point that I made earlier, that you have to look at the ecosystem. So part of certainly the strategy that we like to look at is that how do we then help organizations to firstly understand that, in fact, if you adopt digital ethics within your company, and if you adopt data ethics within your company, you can actually start building that level of trust within your company first. before you even start talking about your customers, because then customers definitely will never trust you with their data, especially now. So most of it is to do with behavior. And I think, questions in relation to what Daniel was saying is pretty much the same thing, because you cannot go to a workforce, and we've actually seen that firsthand. When the CEO goes to their salespeople and say, okay, I want you to start changing your sales process that you've been doing for the past 20 years because I want AI, the salesperson will be like, no, they'll just quit. So you have to take it step by step yet again. And big part of that, and indeed, if we talk about ecosystem, what is the central part of the ecosystem? People. So if you're not willing to change the behaviors, if you're not willing to basically engage with people more before you even start talking about the technology, then the ecosystem will fail. And this is what the work that we do pretty much day in and day out. And it has to be really, the first step towards adopting any kind of AI strategy, in our opinion, is to start looking at what are the behavioral and habitual challenges that could actually stop any progress in terms of AI adoption. And you start working from that point.
It's interesting you make the point about trust. I actually did some research recently looking at the sort of the public's attitudes towards different sectors. And one of the things I was astonished about was the sort of gap between those where there's a very sort of significant positive view, like supermarkets, pharma companies, and actually social media companies and technology companies. And it was and I'm sure there's been a kind of COVID bounce for the pharmaceutical companies, but it was absolutely astonishing to me how little trust there was in some of the biggest technology companies in the world. Katrina, just on that point about skills and training and boot camps, do you have a take from EY?
Well, yes, there's lots of free courses online. The Minister mentioned the Google Garage, which is free, obviously. There's lots of fantastic courses that are free from Microsoft and IBM. But of course, it's great to upskill people. But I really think what we need to do is, as organizations, is to ensure that there are standards for the organization, and that those standards or those internal controls are in place. And that's not something that can be done overnight, and it's not something that can potentially be done by someone going on a free course, right? It's actually, I guess, a set of skills that need to be built within an organization in order for us to manage better the challenges with AI adoption. So I think internal controls are absolutely essential. Get the standards, get the controls frameworks in place, and then at least you've got an organization that is cognizant of the issues and challenges, and make the statement, make sure it's owned by C-suite, make sure that your legal department's aware of some of the legal and ethical challenges that you may encounter, and really just make sure that the lifeblood of the organization understands that AI adoption can be great for an organization. If I look at our people, a lot of them deal with numbers, data, day in, day out. What we're doing internally is using and adopting AI to take out some of the mundane activities that machines can do to help our people really just deliver the exciting work. So make sure that people understand that it's challenging, it can be controlled well, but also it's really exciting if you're driving adoption of AI within your organization, because certainly our people are feeling far more valued as a result of having some of that mundane activity taken away from them.
We're just nearly at the end of our time. James, I don't know if you had one final comment you wanted to make on that question, or indeed anything else.
If I may, thank you. So I do have a particular perspective on this, I think, because I also delivered training within my organization, within Atos, and teach people a lot of the data skills there. And similarly, I also look at skill levels in the other organizations that I work with. And I think that one of the challenges that we really have when we're talking about skills, and we want to spread AI and spread machine learning and the different organizations that use it, is that it becomes quite difficult to go from kind of, I suppose, that low skill level to that medium skill level and have practical applications. That people take some free online courses, and it may be that they've got a lot of skills, they've got a lot of knowledge, but it's still not at the level where an organization is going to trust their staff to say, oh, you've got this certificate from this online course, here, take all of our data, act on it. And in a sort of related challenge, the whole, if you like, the machine learning pipeline can often involve lots of different skills. So it's not just the machine learning skills in deploying an algorithm that you need, also your cloud computation skills, your data engineering skills, but also your skills in developing business cases and how you evaluate use cases. And so the actual threshold before an organization can even do some relatively basic things within machine learning is actually really quite high, because you need to pull all of these skills together. And I think that that first step is actually one of the hardest ones that organizations face, and it's the hardest one from a skills perspective, because before you can even do anything, you need to actually have a lot of skills together in one place. And so I do think that whilst a lot of these kind of free courses or even the paid courses are often a really, really great place to start, that they're often insufficient to actually even make that first step, that you need to have a framework and the ability to pull all of these things together to meet that kind of minimum threshold to start delivering. And once you start delivering that within an organization, I find things really, really tend to accelerate. People trust people to do good work. People have the experience, they've got that demonstrated value. So I think that maybe some emphasis from a skills perspective on overcoming that first hurdle and how we can help these organizations take that first big step is really important from a skills perspective.
Okay, thank you so much, James, and thank you to all of our three genuinely expert panelists. And of course, thank you again for the minister. As I said at the time, it is great having someone who is both enthusiastic but also seems to be completely across his brief and also managed to answer a question while I was speaking. And I also found it encouraging that the government's strategy on this was also widely welcomed. That's not always the case, as I think Tim said, for government reports. So I think that it feels as if this issue is in a good place. I'm sorry we weren't able to bring in more questions for the audience, but I'd like again just to thank you all for participating today, and I hope you have a great rest of today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.